We're going to talk about the halachot of Shabbat. What is the origin? Like, where do they come from? How were they developed? Because the way we will look at the laws of Shabbat today, they're very, very extensive and very limiting. And in many cases, people don't know the difference between laws that originated in the Torah, laws that were added by the rabbis, and things that that came later on. So let us look at the source. We start with the Mishnah, and then we'll go back to the Torah to see what the Torah says. In the Mishnah, there's a Mishnah in Masechet Hagigah that speaks about Shabbat in the following words. It says, "Ilchot Shabbat, harei hen keharirim hateluyin base'ara, shehen mikra mu'at v'halachot merubot." It says the laws of Shabbat are like mountains dangling from a hair. Like you suspend a whole mountain by one hair, by one human hair, or a thread. What is the thread? And why do they call it like that? Because when you look at the text, the biblical text, there's very little that speaks about Shabbat. And then when you look at the Mishnah and then later literature, there's extensive literature. I mean, even today, if you look at books that were published in the last couple of years, you probably have hundreds of books on the Shabbat. So where did it come from? So it says, Mikra mu'ad v'alachot merubot. Little text in the Torah, but a lot of text in later literature. So what are the psukim? We have Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. You shall not do any work on Shabbat. Vayom ha'shevi'it tishbot. You shall cease of work on the seventh day. A couple of others. Lo teva'aru esh b'chol moshavotechem. You should not start a fire in all your dwelling places, etc. Maybe if you put all the biblical texts that speaks about Shabbat in the Torah, even if you add the Nevi'im, the prophets, maybe it will be 2 pages in a book. That's it. But the halachot of Shabbat are divided into different categories. People usually mix them all together. For people driving or starting a fire or tearing toilet paper or touching money is all the same problem. But it's not, because they come from different categories. So they usually refer to 5 categories. One is called avot melachot, the fathers, toladot, the children. So the fathers and the children meaning the category and subcategory. Like the categories are known as 39 categories of melachot, and then there are subcategories that are filed under them. But the distinction between the category and subcategory is problematic. So we have to get there. Then we have those are 2 categories. Then you have one which is called shivut, which is all the prohibitions which are rabbinical, and the rabbis decided to make them forbidden because they are similar to something which is forbidden by the Torah, or because they might lead you to something which is forbidden by the Torah. So for example, not climbing a tree on Shabbat, there's no problem with it, but the rabbi said don't do it because this will lead you to breaking a branch, which is like harvesting, detaching something from its source of life. Riding a horse, not a problem according to the Torah, riding a horse. But the rabbi said again, you're going to break a branch in order to use it as a spur to hit the animal. So you can't do that. Swimming actually in the ocean, not in a swimming pool. There wasn't that common at the time. But they said that swimming is not allowed because you'll end up building a boat. It's all those kinds of gezerot.
What about bicycle?
Bicycle is we're talking about the rabbinical. So that was in Talmudic times. There were no bicycles. But in modern times, as a side issue, most Orthodox Jews don't use bicycle on Shabbat. But there's a very famous, well-known ruling by the Ben Ish Hai, Rabbi Yosef Haim of Bavel of the previous century, who ruled that you could ride bicycle on Shabbat. This was upheld by Haim Ovadia Yosef, who said that there's no prohibition. He says, if you want to be mahmir, you want to be strict, so don't ride bike on Shabbat. But there is no problem with the bike, and we don't add new decrees such as you'll end up fixing the bike. Because anyway, the most common things that could happen with a bicycle is either the chain falls or you have a flat tire. If you have a flat tire and you inflate it on Shabbat, there's no problem. At least, you've inflated a couple of times until you don't patch it, but inflate until you get to where you have to go. You have to get, and putting the chain back is not considered fixing because it's a common thing that even when you restore it, it's going to fall again. It's like opening a folding chair, that opening and closing. So this is the concept of shavut. Muktzeh is a different category. Muktzeh are the things that literally muktzeh means set aside. From the word katzeh. Muktzeh, so you put it in the katzeh, you put it at the end, and you don't touch it. So a lot of things that are used for forbidden activity on Shabbat fall under the category of muktzeh. And some things, even though they're not used for forbidden work, the rabbis made them muktzeh, set aside. So there are different levels there. So, for example, money is muktzeh on Shabbat. You cannot touch or handle money on Shabbat. Even though that the end goal, what do you use money for? You use it to purchase things. Buying and selling on Shabbat is not biblically forbidden. It's only forbidden by the rabbis. And the reason for that, it's a long history, but basically, in the time of the Torah, the more common way of buying things on a daily basis was barter. People lived in villages, so you exchange. You don't use a monetary system. The monetary system kept changing with the kings, and it depended on the weight of metal, and it's always a complicated thing. Coins would be eroded, and you start with let's say with an ounce of gold. A couple of years later, you have half an ounce. So it was easier for people to use on a regular basis bartering. That's why Ephron tells Avraham when he wants to buy the burial spot of Ma'arat HaMachpelah, says 400 shekel kesef over lasoher. The literal meaning of the word shekel is weight, something that weights that has the right weight of metal, and over lasoher is what we call today a currency, something that you could use anywhere. So that was a rare thing. So at the time of the Torah, there was no need to put commercial exchange into the prohibition. And the rabbis, when they wanted to put the prohibition on, when they felt that people are doing commercial activity on Shabbat, buying and selling, something that's already mentioned in the book of Yirmiyahu and Nehemiah in the Tanakh, where there was open commerce in Yerushalayim on Shabbat, the marketplace. Nehemiah says, I see at the time people would bring fresh fruit, fresh fish on Shabbat and selling them in Yerushalayim, and he rebuked them. He says, you cannot enter Yerushalayim on Shabbat. So they would set shop outside the wall, and people would go out there to buy, and he drove them away from there. So the rabbis wanted to bypass that. So one of the methods that they did that is by announcing that you cannot touch money on Shabbat, and that's it. So now all commerce basically came to a stop. The reason they didn't say categorically that you cannot do any commercial activity on Shabbat is because they knew that sometimes it will be needed. So they left the back door open for such cases. For example, if you have a bar mitzvah, you have a lot of guests at home, and you ran out of, let's say, soda or bread, whatever. So now you're going to go to your friend who has a grocery store, right? He says, can you open for me and I get a couple? But now you're buying on Shabbat. Again, for this case, for mitzvah, it's okay. They knew this will come up. Or in the synagogue, we do some kind of selling mitzvot or auctioning and all that. You want to give a gift to a friend on Shabbat. All these things, the rabbi sort of made an exception for. But those all fall under the definition of muktzeh. And then we have something called ovadin dehol. Things that are not forbidden, but they do not belong on Shabbat. It's something that we associate with a weekday activity. And this is something that is flexible. It depends on what is common, what is considered non-Shabbat activity. This is what people put under if you ever heard the phrase, the spirit of Shabbat, right? So people say, oh, what you're doing is not forbidden, but it's not in the spirit of Shabbat. So one classic example that is very common today is anything that has to do with exercising, running, jogging, weights, whatever, all these things. So in the time of the Gemara, this was not even discussed. If they spoke about running, they spoke about walking fast in an unrefined manner. They say this is not nice. This is what you do on a regular day. In the time of the Shulchan Aruch, 1,000 years later, it said that this kind of activity is not appropriate for Shabbat for adults, but young kids could do it or teenagers could do that because they enjoy it on Shabbat. And when you come to our time and place, the whole situation is different. The reason in the past the rabbi spoke about, or the halakha spoke about running as something that children or teenagers do, because adults were too tired on Shabbat. They worked physically the whole week. On Shabbat, they want to sit down and relax, not go jogging. But in modern time, people sit in an office all day. A lot of people work in a sedentary job during the week, and it's only on Shabbat that they have time to relax, where they're, even if they not only jog, but they're in a more intensive manner. But still, for them, that's on Shabbat. So that's a very subjective thing when you say what is called Ovadin Dehol. So all these are the categories of Shabbat. The way they are framed in the Mishnah, we'll start just with the first 11 ones. The Mishnah names 39 of them. I'll just read the first list for today. And they say this is it. Hazoreach horesh hakotzer hame'amer, hadash hazorer haborer hatochen, hamarkid halash ve'aofeh. There are 11 activities that are all related to making bread that are forbidden on Shabbat. It starts from zoreah, sowing, horesh, plowing, kotzer, harvesting, me'amer, gathering the stalks into sheaves and tying them, hadash, this is separating the shaft from the grain, the outer shell, usually either by having an animal walk on it or in a mill, in some kind of a mill that removes the outer shell, or they would have if you ever saw the big stone rolling on that an animal would drag, going in circles, going over that. That was a very difficult process in the past. They didn't have the machinery for that, so the grain sometimes has to be soaked before in order to make it easier to remove that thin skin. Azoreh was a way of, after doing that, now you have, after breaking the grain from the shaft, now you have a mixture. So how are you going to separate that? They used to throw it in the air and then move the tray a little bit. The heavy grains would fall and the wind would carry the shaft away. We don't see it today. It's not very common. But at the time of the Gemara, it was a common thing, to the extent that they even discussed it from the point of view of environmental hazard. And they say that you have to remove such activity from the city at least 50 feet, because the wind carries the shaft and it causes breathing problems or without the pollution. Then you have borer, and that is, after you did that, you go usually manually and you look for little stones and remove them from the grains. Hatohen, grinding the wheat into flour. Hamarkid, that's sifting in a sieve the flour to separate all other elements. Halash, kneading. Ve'ofeh, baking. So all these melachot are listed as the first 11, the set of everything that has to do with making bread which is forbidden on Shabbat. And here we have to, one of the main problems of this list is, if you realize we have four of those actions are basically the same. It's separating the edible from the non-edible. It's pressing the grains with a stone to remove the chaff, then throwing it in the wind to separate the chaff and the grains, then removing by hand stones, and then sifting it. As a result, when the halacha started getting into the details of those laws, it became very complicated. And today, if you talk to Orthodox people and you ask them about their Shabbat and what is one of the most difficult prohibitions to keep on Shabbat, they will tell you boer, separating the edible from the non-edible, or the good from the bad, because because you will see there are four categories that deal with it, so it must be very complicated. And in reality, when they apply it, they say it's about separating pits from fruits, bones from fish, a salt shaker that has rice in it, is it a problem or not? But as we'll see, the list of melachot had a completely different origin. As a matter of fact, and that's an important thing to remember, as a matter of fact, what the rabbis did with the list, they tried to make life easier for people. Before the list was created, we'll see that as contrary to popular belief, this is not something that was handed down to Moshe from Har Sinai. The list of the 39 works was not handed to Moshe from Sinai, and it could not have been, because the phrasing and the way they look at it is rabbinical. Besides that, there are many types of work that the rabbis argued. Do they make the list? Do they stay out of the list? So once we see a debate like that, we say something must have gone wrong. They forgot something, or something else happened. What happened was that the Torah says those general rules, and people had oral tradition of what to keep and what not to keep, and what to refrain from. But at a certain point, because of the fear of people from breaking Shabbat, they pushed it to an extreme. And it was especially after they came back from Bavel. In Bavel, the Babylonians had a belief that Shabbat is the day of destruction. They had a similar calendar. They also have a solar lunar calendar like we have. But for them, the seventh day, from the word Shabbat, complete cessation, complete end of all work, for them Shabbat is the destruction of the world. So anything that you do could be dangerous. So they advocated not doing anything at all. So people would not eat hot food, would not leave fire in the house, and most significantly, something that today we take for granted, they would not save someone's life on Shabbat. If someone, for them, because they said, if I'm saving, I will save his life by breaking Shabbat. What is more important? For them, more important was to observe Shabbat. So they said, if someone fell, we have that from what we call sectarian Judaism. They say, if someone fell into a pit on Shabbat, what do? You stand by the pit and you say, tough luck. I'm just exaggerating. They didn't say that. They said you have to wait until Motei Shabbat. If you survive, you survive. If not, Allah ma'ak. This is what God wanted. So the rabbis actually came to limit the prohibitions on Shabbat, and they wanted to create a list which will be easy for people to remember. So since a lot of people knew that list that I just mentioned of how to make bread, right? And most commonly, if a kid complained to his dad, I'm tired, I can't work, whatever, and he would say, you lazy boy, you're lucky that you have bread on the table. You know what people had to do to get the bread? They had to sow and to harvest and to bundle the bundles, and then to separate the chaff and throw it in the air. Meaning that was a list that was sort of like a maxim that people knew. But Bezat Hashem, we'll get to the other melachot in the future. Let's go on.